come to see the task of philosophy as like kind of skirting around the mystery, like trying to get as close to it as possible. But in the best case scenario, we're just getting like a more detailed silhouette of what cannot be said. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you were saying you don't like the term divine.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Before I get back to the original point, that makes me think of the drawing technique where people will say like, don't draw the chair, draw the space around the chair, you know, and then the chair arises. But it's like...
The chair arises, yeah.
That is kind of what philosophy feels like in a lot of ways. It's like drawing these... fencing off certain things to see what comes out of it. But my original point was that this thing that I've kind of fallen back into doing, but I've done for a while, is anytime I write God or type God, I will do lowercase g, then a dash, and a lowercase d. Because there is something about writing out God that feels kind of sacrilegious to me.
Yeah.
In that what I mean is God. But if I talk about the Christian God, which I tend to do, that I will write with a capital G-O-D. Right. Because that's the Christian God. But when I say God, and I'm talking about this God, the mystery God, I like having something else to signify it.
I like that. I was thinking, I thought you were going to say, like, you put it in quotation marks, but I like that even more, like the dash. Because quotation marks, in a way, it's like I'm using this term while also pointing to the fact that it's not ideal. Right. But, like, I'm using it as a placeholder.
Well, and that there's something about...
But the dash, I feel like, is almost better.
Oh, thanks. I think there's something about the quotation mark that is like, in acknowledging that this word isn't ideal, it's still like the literary tool that I want to use to talk about this thing. Like sometimes using that word in an unideal way is communicating an additional point. So it's like there's purpose behind that. But I think I agree with you that it feels different with God. And I do want to note too that I think this is actually a tradition in Jewish mysticism that I stole it from.
The Kabbalah?
I think it is a Kabbalah tradition, but I could be wrong. But that originally rose out of Gnosticism. Or no, did it? There's some relationship between Christian Gnosticism and Jewish mysticism that my brain is not coming to right now, but I just wanted to note that this is not my original idea. It's
right. No, it's like a thing in like negative theology. Yeah. And I also don't know a ton about it. I did like years ago, I did a research paper that drew from the Kabbalah a little bit. And as far as I know, there's aspects of it that kind of bring to mind negative theology, like trying to define God by what God is not. So kind of skirting around the mystery. And I like that. I mean, because in a sense, anytime with something as broad and all-encompassing as the divine or God with like the O dashed out, you know, whatever you want to call it, as soon as you try to define it positively, it's kind of putting God into a box, like confining God to a limited space that's, you know, within the positively defined definition that you've given. Yeah, that was a very circular definition, but...
No, I think it's I think any definition of this kind of has to be, and I think that that's actually really helpful.
I'm glad.
That's so funny. Okay, another thing that I wanted to ask you is, because we've kind of talked about like the mirrored relationship of art and poetry, well, and when I say art, like a physical medium of art, you as a painter, but also like different modalities of like fine art as opposed to like literary art. They're still operating in language, even though we understand those languages as different. Or actually, do you disagree with that, and that you think that painting exists outside of language in an important way? Or is it just a different language that still falls victim to the same problem, but because it's a different avenue of language, it allows insight into the thing in a way that like poetry or literature or philosophical writing can't? That like do you hear what I'm saying? That I think was a very poorly posed question.
No, that was great. I thought the question was great. I think it's interesting because when I talk about it, I describe painting as like a different dimension of my philosophy, of my like philosophical endeavors. And in a sense, it does transcend the limits of language, like understood in a linguistic sense, you know, like English, German, Italian, whatever. But it's still a kind of communication. It still communicates something, but in a way that doesn't necessitate language in a linguistic sense. But then at the same time, that's the advantage of it. But then at the same time, there's still it's almost like I'm trying to use a non-linguistic sort of language in order to further hone in on the mystery, because I still have like an impulse or a desire to express in spoken or written language what exactly I am communicating in like a visual way. So in like the non-linguistic sort of language of visual art kind of pushes me further, like to get closer to the mystery. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because I do think that there is a very real like experiential piece of it that like almost a painting engages the senses in a different way than written word does. Definitely. And I think that when we're talking about an experience, senses are the dimension through which we experience. So even though we're using our eyes for both, it's very different stimuli. And something came across my feed that I was like, oh my God, I gotta tell Lauren this. And it's a Da Vinci quote. And I was like, I feel weird about this quote being like a "wasn't it so beautiful" quote, like one of those, because there are certain quotes that are like, yeah, it's trite, but it's nice and it's great. I'm fine with that being like enshrined in our collective conscious. That's great.
Yeah.
This one, I don't know. And so it's Da Vinci.
Okay, I'm really curious.
Painting is poetry that is seen rather than felt. And poetry is painting that is felt rather than seen. And I was kind of like, wrong answer. I really, this has happened on so many podcasts where I'm like, I want one of the big Family Feud exes with the, like, buzzer noise.
Can we add like special effects somehow? I was wondering like,
but yeah, it's like, it's seen rather than felt. It's like, the experience of painting doesn't just stop at the eyes. Aren't you feeling what you're seeing in the same way that you are with poetry? And it was like, of course, so the strange. Post, I don't remember what the account is that I saw it on, or if it was even an account I follow, but it was like text layered over like an abstract, pretty art thing, whatever. And I'm like, this is an odd thing.
Yeah. It's almost like, it's almost trivializing the experience of like viewing a painting and also reading poetry. Like both, it's kind of like diminishing like what it does. I don't know, at least for me.
No, I agree, because it's like, well, you are seeing a poem, and like, what about concrete poems and acrostic poems? And, you know, even though those maybe aren't great examples, but poems are visual in a lot of ways too. Like some poems are really meant to be read the same way other poems are really meant to be spoken out loud and heard and performed. And like the way line breaks change, like completely can update the meaning of a poem. So it's like,
there are visual aspects of a poem that are actually pretty important to the interpretation. Like definitely line breaks, or like stanza structure,
capitalization.
It can add a whole different dimension to the text. That's a weird quote.
Right? And maybe it's falsely attributed or from something else that I don't have the context of, so I just saw the one quote. But interesting to think that that is what Da Vinci thought, considering he was also a fine artist and we don't remember him as a poet, you know?
Did he write poetry?
I don't think so. But again, I could be wrong. Maybe he did, and he was just bitter that people weren't reading
that nobody read it. Yeah, they're like, people only know me for my art.
Is something to be felt.
And people are like, oh, what an amazing painting. And he's like, read my poetry.
Literally me at 12 years old thinking I had like cracked the code. They're like, you got such good grades. They haven't even read my poetry.
They haven't even read. Yeah. Oh, it's funny.
But yeah, okay, so I'm glad we share that intuition. So what's the relationship between the felt and the seen that he's talking about then? I don't know where to delineate the two.
Me neither. I think it's really weird to try to separate them with such stark boundaries, you know?
Is there a separation?
I don't think so.
Is it a mistake for us to conflate them?
To conflate them.
Like something that is seen as automatically felt?
No, I mean, not in every case. Like, if I'm reading, like, I don't know, some sort of, like, economic report that I don't find particularly interesting, that's not going to, like, resonate in my soul, you know, like a Rilke poem would.
Right.
But maybe for some people.
But
not for me.
So then, I guess, what are we talking about when we say felt? Because couldn't it may not, like, resonate in that way of the ineffable, but it would certainly invite a feeling. Frustration, like if you're reading an
boredom.
Instruction manual, boredom, right? It's like those are still feelings. So part of me is like, what do you mean it's seen and not felt? Don't you have to immediately feel it if you're seeing something?
Yeah, I mean, there's like the more mundane understanding of like feeling, which is like every sensory perception, like sight, smell, touch, all of those is a type of feeling.
Is a feeling,
and then there's in like a literal sense. But then there's sort of the more poetic, flowery sort of feeling where it's like something's like pulling you. Yeah, does it sing? Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I don't even know what that is. I can't even point to what that is. I don't think maybe one day in the future we will be able to reduce it down to a particular, like, amalgamation of physiological, like, responses or whatever. But that sort of feeling in itself is unsayable, ineffable.
Yeah.
Yeah.